delete, stop. This cannot go out.
Oh, girl, it's out. It's up and out.
What?
And it's hot. These are OnlyFans numbers. I usually got show feet to go this viral. Barbara's gonna get everything she needs.
Welcome back to Restorative Justice Reflections. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for all the ancestors. And today I'm here with Ashley Lipscomb to dive into the restorative themes, or lack thereof, found in Season 1, Episode 3 of ABC's hit show, Abbott Elementary, Wishlist. As always, our conversation here is not to critique the story and production choices of the creators, but we will highlight how restorative justice could apply to the situations in this episode, like creating a welcome, nurturing classroom environment while dealing with limited supplies and funding. Hopefully this will give you some insight into applying restorative justice ways of being inside and out of the classroom. If you want a deeper look into applying restorative justice to your everyday life, join our inner circle to connect with other RJ-minded folks and get bonus content. If you want to deepen your practice, check out our courses. And if you want to see this work in your school or organization, invite us for coaching or training so we can help you implement this way of being into your community. Of course, links to everything in the description. Now let's get to it.
I am so excited to welcome Ashley to the show. Ashley, tell the people about yourself.
Hello. You said all the ancestors, so I'm going to say Ashley Yolanda Lipscomb. Yolanda being named after someone from my matriarchal village, one of my favorite people, my auntie, who taught me how to be fierce, to be myself, and to be loving. So myself, I am the co-founder and one of the leading facilitators of the Institute for Anti-Racist Education, where we work with schools, right, to be truthful sites of social transformation for students by creating really radically loving and caring schools. I also am a scholar now, heading into my second year as a PhD student, studying Black educational activism from communities who had to fight to even learn how to read. So definitely interested in 19th century things. But most importantly, I am family, friend. I'm a godmother, everyone's favorite auntie. Hopefully one day, as we affectionately call them, rich auntie. And all the things that, are part of living in life. Most times I'm a mess, but today I'm just glad to be here.
And I am so glad to be here. So many of the people who are coming on here are people who I've built relationships with over the past few years through our connections over the internet and social media, which is a big part of today's episode. But, we've also had good conversations about what it means to do equity work, anti-racist work, justice work within the context of schools. And Abbott Elementary has been like a really great vehicle to have these kind of conversations. Tell us about your experience viewing this show.
First of all, I love this show. I think Abbott Elementary is hilarious. And it feels like we were seen. Like when I was teaching, I was like, so I can see some of the people who I work with in this show, and I just thought it was the best. And then this particular episode too was a joy to watch, right? Because there's so much that comes up, so I'll wait to talk about it. But really, really love this show overall. Huge fan.
Beautiful. As somebody who spent significant time in a classroom and is now doing work tangential to classrooms, right? The ways that this show brings up so many of the issues that teachers and educators and people who are like around schools are facing is so important. And so we're going to highlight a couple of those. But to give a short synopsis of this episode, Wishlist, thank you, Wikipedia, we have Janine trying to make a viral video to get supplies for her classroom with Ava's help. She then also asks Ava to secretly make a video for Barbara, who also needs supplies but is refusing any help. Ava makes exaggerated videos for both Janine and Barbara's, which, go viral, but create an uncomfortable situation for her with the tragedy porn of it all. At the same time, Jacob is trying to do what he can with the donated items that were not requested, and Janine is also supporting Gregory Eddy to decorate his classroom to feel like a more welcome space. So much to unpack here. Let's start kind of at the beginning, right? We have this framework of teachers not having what they need, or so they're resorting to having like people donate in so many ways, shape, or forms.
So it's Wishlist week here at Abbott Elementary. The city doesn't always give us the funding we need for our supplies. I know I keep saying that, but it keeps being true. It's not like we have nothing. We clip old pictures out of magazines from the barbershop down the street. The whole Wishlist thing makes it very easy for the community to help.
Obviously, some of the things that are donated aren't welcome, aren't needed. But then they do make really specific asks. And as we watch this, right, you're fortunate enough to have worked in spaces where that kind of thing wasn't necessarily needed. And, donors choose is important, like all the ways that teachers and educators fundraise to meet their classroom needs are important. But as you were watching this, what were the feelings, reflections from your experience and the things that you've observed? What were the things that were coming up from you?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they even need a wish list in the first place is just a hot mess, right? And the fact that sometimes we even have to ask parents for supplies, I think is also a hot mess. Because at the end of the day, these are things that the schools should supply at the basic fundamental level. When we think about what students need to learn, why do teachers not have all the tools that they need, right, to do that and do it well? When I was teaching, I did not have that experience, right? My school district did a great job of providing so many foundational materials that I would need. Like, we got a catalog, I got a certain budget that I could use to purchase all these things from the catalog. So, you got to fill out a form to meet the budget that they gave us. And it was a decent budget, right, for the catalog that I could order from. And so that took the pressure off of having to do, right, some of those things. So that means my energy is spent elsewhere. And if I really do want to think about the more creative things I want in my classroom, shout out to Mr. Eddie, who was trying to figure out how to, really shape his classroom environment, I was able to focus more so on that creative energy there. Especially when I got into my own little classroom. I was really excited. I had taught in the media center for a while. And then when I finally got into my own classroom, I was like, yes, this is my space. I can do what I want. And that freedom and the beauty of having, being able to cultivate that space outside of the supplies that the school was already giving me. Right. If I needed more paper on to do something, I knew they would supply it. And so that was a beautiful gift that I had, that I was able to sort of teach in that experience. Whereas some of my best friends who are also teachers who teach in a district that is underfunded, they don't have that experience. So I hear the stories about how they have to do this for their classroom. They're already not getting paid enough. Like, let's just be clear. Mm-hmm. You're already not getting paid what you should as teachers. And then now on top of that, I got to buy supplies to make sure the students have what they even need. Like a pen or a pencil, like those are the basic necessities. And like teachers are buying them. And so I do think that the wish list is a great way to get around that for now. But it's an awful thing that they have to do, knowing that schools can supply their needs, right?
Yeah. When I think about principles of restorative justice and tangent to, what we're observing here, something around the idea of communities have what they need to solve the problems that they have, right? They have the resources, they have the skills, the know-how, right? Part of what would solve all of these problems is that funding from the state, from the district, et cetera, right? But when that's not happening, right, what are the ways that we can go about making ends meet? And I think the teachers in the show and, teachers everywhere are really resourceful at figuring out the ways to meet the needs of their students, right? Some less than legal that we've seen like Melissa engage in other instances, but here in this show, right? Using the thing.
Sorry.
Exactly. Right. What are the ways that we can leverage the resources available to us, right? And we see Janine like do her best, like in engaging in social media campaigns to, drum up support.
Let's start from the beginning. Hi, I'm Janine Teagues, and I teach
See how I spelled my name out in the back on the projector on the wall?
Real children need school supplies. What do we need? Tape. Right-handed scissors, So I'm going to like put the items over my head, pictures, and as soon as I learn how to do that, and you get the idea. 1, 2, 3. So thank you from me.
And I'm sure what she initially created might have been helpful. And like, hey, everybody is also uniquely gifted and we are needed for what they bring. Ava is somebody, as problematic as she is, like really does have a marketing, storytelling, production expertise. And is able to make things meet. And so, as hard as it was for Janine to go to Ava for help, right? Like doing that, making those asks of people like are really important so you can get what you need for your community.
Yeah, for sure. And then too, it also brings about a very interesting opportunity, right? Ava is great. She is a storyteller. She knows how to work social media, how to do what needs to get done, right? She's also very popular. She's funny, all the things. But also, how, as an administrator, could she have thought more creatively about what strategic partnerships are needed to get those supplies? Like
For
teachers
sure.
are resourceful, right? Because they have the skills and they're gonna make a way. Like Miss Howard, I love her too, right? We gonna make it do what it do. That's what we would say in my neighborhood. We gonna make it do what it do. But also thinking about in the community, in a restorative approach, what partnerships are necessary for the community in order to help this school not operate in a silo, right? When the state isn't doing what it's supposed to do, how do we even think about what can we do as a community to make sure that students have what they need? If there are organizations in your local neighborhood, right, that are doing the work of supporting youth empowerment, how is this also part of that? What are
Yeah.
some strategic partnerships can they make, right, to make this a really thoughtful communal endeavor to make sure that students have what they need to learn?
Like you're saying, Ava's like really great at the storytelling, the production of all that, but like her orientation towards it is like, yes, this is like a beautiful manifestation of my work and my expertise. And as much
Mm-hmm.
as, the kids do get to benefit that from that, the school does get to benefit from that. If at all, if her orientation was towards like, how can I use these skills to like comprehensively within the school, like not just like, hey, for these two teachers, get help us get what they need, right? Things would be very different. Of course, like Ava is such an exaggerated, heightened character that has like shades of like people that we might see in school leadership, and so it's hard to like give like real critiques of a character on a TV show. But like we do wish that like people who are leading schools, right, not play favorites, right, or really do think holistically about the needs of the school, and instead of saying like, hey, go fund Miss Howard, our best teacher, but like in this tragic way, like doesn't have what she needs, right? Like, hey, what if we think a little bit more holistically? And I do think like that is something that in like the fundraising world, the organizing world, in the world of messaging, asking people to support, like we need to be really careful of, right? There are lots of ways that our messaging about our causes or the things that we're doing like can be framed like as deficit based versus asset based, and at different times like those things pull on heartstrings rather effectively, but like at what cost? What is the damage that's being done?
For sure. And I think about even in the work that I do, right? I'm a nonprofit. And so I have to wrestle with the fact that I'm a part of the nonprofit industrial complex that lives and breathes off those sad stories. And I think about, some of the students I work with whose stories mirror mine. And I think about how, as a child who's had different experiences, who was raised differently, who had to go over certain hurdles, like to tell the story of people's heartstrings. Of course, they're going to want to give and donate to other kids who have that experience. But it's my story to own. And you don't have to hear the hardships in order for my story to be valuable. Like, when do we begin to think about, like, we just give because every child, and I think this is a restorative approach, every child, every human being is deserving of radical care at the basic foundation, right? Not because they're so needy, they don't have all these things. And we know that that's true, but maybe, just maybe, we want to give to students simply because they need it and they deserve it. Like, why is that just not the basics of wanting to give to kids? not because we hear these stories and they're pulling our heartstrings. Why are we as individuals, as communities, not just like, let me just do it just because kids need it, right?
Yeah, it's impossible to have a real conversation about this and not talk about like wealth inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And I say wealth inequality, not income inequality, right? Because like the hoarding of wealth like
Mm-hmm.
has relatively little to do with like how much people make in exchange for their labor, right? Like the people who control most of the world's assets, right? Like did not make their money through like a salary, right? And so when those people go out and try to decide like, oh, these are the philanthropic endeavors, these are the people who are deserving of like my philanthropy dollars for my tax write-offs, right? Like that's a really hard way to like think about exemplifying care, right? And we are in this world where that is the primary way that resources are allocated. And so like without that ethic of radical care that I think Miss Howard represents so beautifully, what are the ways that we can navigate the world, schools, our organizations with those things in mind?
For sure. And I think she gives us a great framing, right?
My kids don't have half the supplies they need most of the time, but they don't need to know that.
Yeah, but I saw your kids painting with empty watercolors. It's our job.
Our job is to build them up, make them confident. Is it nice to have stuff? Sure. But my students do not need to feel less than because they do not have stuff. So we talk about what they do have, not about what they don't.
And I think that that's a really important starting point. What do they have, right? This creative energy. What do they have? This brilliance, this kind. Look at how they were drawing pictures for Mr. Eddie. This care, this kindness, right? You have beautiful ways that students show up in the world. That's something they do have. And we get to really fund and nurture that creative energy. We get to ensure, right, that students have more of that. They can cultivate more of those experiences in their classroom because they have those resources. And that's like, I think, a great framing that Ms. Howard gives us. All right, we know. She's like, look, I know we don't have that, but my students don't need to know that they don't have those things. And that's also a really important conversation. How do we as teachers think about that in the classroom? Right? Are we saying to them, well, the school ain't gonna give us this, they're not gonna do this for you? Like, or is it that, we ain't got to tell them that? And most times we don't. I think students see just the love of educators. And I think during this time we need to also talk about how loving these educators were. That this was not just about them getting supplies for themselves, Ava excluded. This was not about them just getting supplies for themselves and what they need. It was really like, okay, this is about the students, and we really care about the students. We want to make sure that they have what they need in our classrooms. And when Ms. Howard is like, yeah, we know we're not going to get it, but I know how beautiful my students are, what they do have, and I'm going to feed into what they do have. And I think that's a great framing we should start thinking about.
And I think like that and holding the tension of love and care does not equal like supplies, resources, money, like is hard to reckon with, right? Where like she's like, when Janine asked like, oh, so you're gonna give the supplies back, she's like, oh hell no, I'm keeping that. Like when those things are available to me, right, like I'm gonna use them. And like if I was able to have those things and be able to do more, like you were saying at the beginning of this conversation, like it would increase like my capacity to be more creative and like turn my attention to other things instead of trying to figure out like how we can source these supplies. Like that would like even like accelerate the level of like which our kids learn. It would alleviate a burden for teachers of like, oh, I can turn my attention to, more generative things rather than just survival. And I think as we as listeners right now, viewers right now, are thinking about the ways that we can address these problems within schools. Yes, we've got to figure out how to be sourceful, scrappy, give care, and all that. But, for those of you who might be listening who are holding the purse strings of foundations or philanthropic efforts, or even like as yourself as a person of means, right? Like what are the ways that resources can be allocated to give these kids the radical care that they so deserve.
And then
On the
also
other side of this, sorry, go ahead.
and also policy, right? How are they
Yeah.
thinking about funding the ways that organizations are trying to make systemic changes, right? What policies are needed so that there is never this type of shortage for teachers? And I think about that a lot, right? And so, like, how can we also get behind efforts that are trying to really change the ways that education is happening in our schools?
Right, because like as you were saying from your experiences, there are places where
Mhm.
teachers don't need to do this,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Um,
Exactly. And we know what they are, right? And who they serve. And so I think that that's a really important part. There are schools that do it. And so when we think about our underfunded schools, right, what are we doing to ensure that there is a gap that's being met, right, in
yeah.
policy, state funding, and not simply just in the hands of teachers and administrators?
On the other side of this story, we have Mr. Eddie, Gregory.
I decorated my room. You want to come see?
Oh, yes. Excuse me, I love a reveal. Let me see this.
What? You don't like it?
Look, Gregory, this is a classroom, not an office. It's just missing a certain warmth. Those stores are great for like ink cartridges or whatever, but I wouldn't rely on them to represent me as a teacher. You know, is this really a reflection of you?
As you saw this storyline playing out, like, yeah, we know that teachers do have limited resources, but you can do things that are building like welcoming, inclusive environments. Talk about what came up for you as you're reviewing this and like the importance of, you know, what might seem frivolous as like classroom decoration, but like, why is that important?
Yeah. Oh man, I love Mr. Eddie for so many reasons. But I think, that moment where he goes out because Janine is like, you need to do something with this classroom. It's really bare. And he like goes out to decorate the room with these generic nature posters that have these like very cliche sayings on them. Janine says it just misses the warmth, right? Is this a reflection of you? And it really made me think about how classroom relationship building happens not just on the walls, but within them. And the ways that students are thinking about their relationship with Mr. Eddie doing the everyday things is just so, in my mind, just so beautiful. Because where Ava tries to make Miss Howard and Janine like these superheroes in education, and that's how we get people to donate, students are seeing Mr. Eddie as everyday people, someone who's playing baseball, someone who's a businessman, even Santa Claus, right? He represents these communal moments of joy. He represents the everyday life, and that is how they connect to him. His existence, just simply being, is how they connect to him. They don't make him a superhero. They make him the everyday. And for me, I think that was such a beautiful thing in terms of how they conceptualize him. And then as he like starts to really think about him decorating the walls, he even says he's like, I'm trying to figure out who I want to be or the type of teacher I want to be. And I think that's also a really important thing for like teachers who are just getting into it. You have time to think about what type of teacher you want to be. And one way to do that is thinking about what's going to cover your walls, because it speaks to the type of environment you're cultivating, the culture, the relationships you're building with students. How does the way that you decorate your room represent and mirror the relationships you're having with your students? And that's what, Mr. Eddie is really trying to figure out, and does, I think, at the end of it, right? He lets those relationships speak louder, and he puts all those pictures up on the wall, even the ones are not as flattering to him.
Yeah. As you were seeing this, I'm curious what you were reflecting on as it came to like the way that you decorated your classroom, the way that you created welcoming environments with the things that were on your walls.
Yeah, it made me think about I taught in a media center at first, so I didn't have my own classroom. And then when I finally got my own class, it gave me a freedom to bring in some of the things that I really like to teach with, which was like emojis and memes and popular culture. and really cultivating the space where students can also sort of be creative and have their own space and put their stuff up. So when I thought about it, I was like, ooh, I was really trying to figure out what type of teacher I was too in a space that was my own. And I think, yeah, using popular culture is just the way to go, because I like fun. I love music. I love having a great time, and so I wanted to bring that energy into my classroom. So you saw emojis everywhere. I use that to also journal with students and things like that.
Yeah, and like speaking to that piece, right? It's not just about what is on the walls, but like what happens inside of those walls. And so having those emojis up there, like using them as like, yes, decoration, but also like ways to check in with students, right? And prompt, like what did that look like? How did you think about that strategically? And how did you use those moments to like build relationships with the students, with each other, and students with you?
It was one of my favorite activities. I love journaling, and I love journaling with students. And so at the time, we had to do like do nows were a big part of teaching at that time. So when students come in, what's the first thing that they're doing as soon as they sit down? How are they transitioning into the learning space? And so I'd put on some music, I'd have the emojis on the board, and I'd say, hey, choose an emoji that represents how you're feeling right now. How are you showing up right now? What's coming up for you? And then students spent time the very beginning of class, and if they saw it on the board when they walked in, they already knew what time it was. So it also sort of became part of our routine. And so when I was doing conferences with students, I'd give space for them to share, their reflections if they wanted to. And a lot of times they always did. And I just thought it was such a beautiful way for us to connect, right? I'd share mine. Sometimes we do an open sharing session if anyone wanted to share their emojis. And it helped me to think, to not only listen to them, but see if they have unique needs, right? You mentioned beyond the supplies earlier. And I think that's one of the things about relationship building that I was able to really just sort of connect with students on a different level because of that. I got to know what some of their skill sets were, right? What some of their assets were, their strengths, things that they wanted, things that were top of mind for them and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really important to think through some of those things. Like, of course, like you do want to get that information from students so you can be informed, but like it's not just enough to be informed, like being responsive to those needs, like following up and engaging, both when there's a need that's expressed, you want to be able to respond to
Oh,
that need as appropriately as you can, but also like, hey, I learned this new skill. Like I learned that you're really skilled in this, and like, hey, I want to give you opportunities to like further develop those skills. Or like, hey, you're really interested in this. Like, hey, I read this article, I saw this book, I saw this video. Like it's just another point of connection, right? I was in this meeting before we were on our call today, where I was with a group of people working for this organization. We were talking about, we really need to do community building circles. We need to build community. And I was like, great, wonderful. We can talk about the ways that we can structure building community building circles into your monthly staff meetings, right? Your monthly all staff meetings. But community building doesn't just happen within the framework of a circle. It can happen in the ways that like, oh, you remembered my nickname. Oh, you remembered my favorite XYZ. Oh, you checked in on me when you saw that I wasn't feeling my best that one day, right? Those moments of building and strengthening relationships are the things that we're like following up on in our day-to-day interactions that can go so much farther than like, all right, it's circle time. Let's get together and share. Not to say that that's not important, but it doesn't mean that it's limited to those spaces.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it also helps to model the ways that students can also advocate for themselves. So if you knew that in your journal, what was coming up for you was that you had the red faced emoji because something happened at home, you were frustrated, you just couldn't connect. That was also a signal to some of them to say, Miss Lipscomb, I think I need some space. Because I would
Mhm.
model that for them as well. Right. I would say, listen, this is where I am today. This is what I'm feeling. I'm a human being too. Would we mind if we thought about, how we engage our classroom time today in this way to help support me? Doing that, not only did they respect it and like sort of lean into that, they were less rowdy. I had less interruptions. I had, because they were like, we hear you. Because I would do that for them. If they had a
Yeah.
need, I follow their lead. If they were like, I just can't do the participation thing today, I feel you. That's cool. We don't have to. Right? I think that's a great way of not only teaching students how to name emotion, how to speak for themselves, how to advocate, but how to respect the community. To hear that, oh,
Yeah.
somebody else in the class also feel that way, I got you. Let me help you out. You need a little bit more support. You want to sit with us? You could kind of just chill and listen to our conversation if you want. I'm from New Jersey, so sometimes.
No, it's beautiful. I'm thinking about like all the ways that, and I'm thinking about all the ways that, these little things that might seem trivial in any given moment, like are actually really important. And so it's just encouragement for folks to be intentional about the ways that you are structuring your classrooms, the time that you're allocating towards making those connections, giving yourself opportunity to make those connections. Again, like this wasn't necessarily a theme that was present in this video, in this episode, but it does remind me of something that, one of the teachers that I used to work with said, like, I realized as a math teacher specifically, right? So much, there's already a lot of intimidation with students coming into my classroom period. And so many of my interactions with them are like corrective or negative seeming, right? Where it's like, oh, this is based out of need, or like, oh, you did something wrong and you need support. Like, what are the ways that I can create moments of connection that aren't necessarily tied to math specifically, but just what are the positive touch points that I can build? And if there's things in your classroom walls that like can do that and help build those connections, all the better. Lots of different creative ways to do that. But I did want to touch on one more point of something that happened in this episode.
If you're appreciating this video, like to help us in the YouTube algorithm, subscribe so you won't miss a video, and share it with someone to help us further amplify this work. Now back to the show.
So we have Jacob, who is doing his best all episode to make the most of what is essentially trash, right? Like,
oh, whoa, you're not throwing that away, are you?
The bloody paper towel or the Hustler magazine?
Oh, no, the boy is in the trash.
This is not trash.
Yes, it is.
We are so quick to throw things away. Always looking for or asking for new. Well, I'm gonna get this thing working and show you that, like our students, you can't give up on something just because it's easy. I mean, this is a perfectly good... Well, I can't find a brand name, but...
Oh, I know what it's called. It's called trash.
This printer like tries to turn it into a planter. Like, in the end of the episode, it doesn't work out at all, right? We have finite hours in the day. We have finite resources, right? It probably would have been a better use of Jacob's time to say, like, appreciate it. This is trash. And I'm gonna like do something else to really anything else. How do you decide like where to allocate your time and resources when people do make those offers, when there are things that are offered to you that like are nice or like well-intentioned, but like not very helpful for reaching your goals?
Yeah, I love Jacob. Shout out to Jacob for always trying. But yeah, I think about our times are just stretched, especially in a time where our service, our work, what we put out into the world, sometimes it feels as if the world is just trying to extract so much from us. And I think about this sort of radical love and care for the self, that sometimes the good intentions about what people try to give to us and things, and if I have to put more effort into making something work, I'm taking away from the opportunity to be more creative, right? Like Miss Howard, working with what we've already got. I'm taking time away from even putting out creative energy, like Janine, trying to get it in those donations through the wish list. Jacob, the entire time, was trying to make this one thing work that wasn't working. So when do we acknowledge that sometimes we just gotta step away? And I think it's in that moment where it's like, all right, I'm putting too much into this, it's not working. It's okay for something not to work out. I think the restorative piece is that we always find our way toward, like, we have enough creativity, flexibility, knows to do what needs to get done.
when we think about like having limited resources, limited time, really, I think about like what are the things that are like high impact, right? All of this effort was to make a planter, right? And what was the planter going to do? Right? Like what was the benefit of that in your space, right? And so like there are things that are worth like banging your head against the wall, like iterating on over and over and over again. There are needs in your community that like, hey, I'm going to put like all that I can into making this work because it is that impactful.
Yeah.
Creating a planter is not one of those things out of trash, right? Like just let it go is fine, right? On its face, no one would be critical of saying like, oh, like you shouldn't spend your time like trying to like upcycle something. Like I think that's something worth doing, but like is that achieving your goals of being a teacher in the space, like a great teacher in the space? And like the answer is very clearly no. Right? Knowing the appropriate time and places to expend efforts on certain things is important. And I think, Barb and Melissa as the veteran teachers, this is only episode 3, but we see them do this throughout the show. It's like, hey, those things are beyond my scope, beyond my control right now. It's not that I don't care about, upcycling, but like, is that going to serve my students? Is that going to allow me to show up the best that I can for my students? No, then I'm just not going to do it. And like, be unashamed.
Right, because Miss Howard was also like, it's all right, we don't have it, but we'll work with what we have. Not into like buying something new either, right? Because I think he critiques them like, I'm not gonna. Maybe we don't need to buy new things. We can just use what we just got. And I'm like, well, isn't that what Miss Howard kind of did too? So yeah, you're right. There are other ways that we can think about doing exactly what he was trying to do, and create more creative ways.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Now you've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Drop your restorative justice reflections from this episode in the comments. And if you want to be a part of a live community conversation about this show, we're hosting a live event on July 31st unpacking restorative justice lessons from Abbott Elementary. Link down below. Hope to see you there.
Well, it's come to the time where we ask the questions that everyone answers on the show. And so you have the ear of Quinta, the writers. Pitch yourself as a character on Abbott Elementary, and what is your arc?
Yeah, I think if I had a story arc, it would be the teacher who was sort of on this journey of unlearning. Because I think first year teachers, we come into it thinking of the teachers who taught before us, right? The Ms. Howards that we've seen. And so teaching has to look this way. I have to be sort of strict. I came from middle school setting. You got to be strict because they'll run all over you. And things like, you can't, you're not their friend, you can't, I unlearned a lot of those things, and really sort of was like, let me just be myself, let me bring in the music, let me bring in the laughter, let me make those connections. That's what makes me the teacher that I am. And I think doing that, I had a beautiful experience. So I'd love to see that story of the teacher who thought that teaching had to be this one way, and that's exactly what they were going to do, but then goes on this unlearning journey to figuring out, well, who's the teacher I actually want to be? Kind of like Mr. Eddie, right? But I'd love to see more of that. I love seeing Quinta and Eddie like develop this love story, and as it unfolds, and like more of the perils of that Black single teacher teaching in schools is also, I find that funny, so I'd love to see more of that. But yeah,
Beautiful, beautiful. So from your mouth to the writer's ears. Oh my goodness.
I'll come in there. I'll be on the show too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your reflections, your stories. How can people support you and your work in the ways that you want to be supported?
Oh, yes, thank you. You can definitely follow us on all the social webs. So Instagram, we are Anti-Racist ED Institute. You can support our work by donating. We currently run a completely free program to 18 to 25-year-olds who want to learn about social transformation and art, right? So we teach them about how your story doesn't have to be manipulated to be told. And so how can we do this in creative ways to honor your truth? And so if you want to donate to our Create Freedom Fellowship, Artivist Fellowship, you can do that on our website, antiracisted.org. Sign up for our newsletter too. We give a bunch of free resources to help the community grow. And some of the things that I've unlearned, right, as an educator. And Yeah, so many other ways. We love volunteers too. So connect with us.
Beautiful, beautiful. And of course, all that will be linked down below. Again, Ashley, thank you so much. We'll
Thank
be
you.
back with another restorative justice reflection on Abbott Elementary Season 1, Episode 4 very soon. But until there, take care, y'all.